All right. Welcome everyone to today. We're going to learn about African American history in Roxbury, and we've been joined so lovingly by Miss Betty Nolan, who will introduce more about herself in a little bit. Please give it up. So Miss Nolan, welcome. Um, First, I guess we want to know, just a little bit about your history here in Roxbury and um, the different things that you've experienced. I mean, at least the changes. All right.
So, thank you everyone for having me. I will say, I came to Roxbury when I was a very little girl. I was about 6 years
Turn
old.
off your phones, please. Sorry.
I was 6 years old when I came to Boston. Prior to that, prior to coming to Boston, I had lived in probably 4 different states and a total of 7 different places prior to Boston. My family was part of the Great Migration that occurred between the 30s and the 50s from the South. And why? My mother grew up with her grandparents because her mom passed when she was 15 months old. So my mother and my aunt, they were twins, grew up in the rural South in those days. And they grew up on a farm. My great-grandfather had a 108-acre farm, but he also reared 9 of his children and 5 other children that came to him either through, women died in childbirth early in those days, or other diseases such as they had a COVID epidemic. It wasn't called COVID, but a flu epidemic of the 1918s. It lasted for about 3 years. So my mother migrated to Boston in '56. And during that time when I came, we first lived in the Cathedral Project. How many know what Cathedral Project is? Okay. So Cathedral, you know what Cathedral Project, okay. So we lived there for a little while, and then we ended up in Lenox. So I grew up in Lenox housing development. Back in the day, we called them projects, for about 6 years, and which I loved Lenox. One of the downturns is that if I came home late, and I know it would come out, and she had a switch waiting for me. But Lenox had, every development had 2 doors, so you can go in one door and out the next. So that's my house. And it was quite a village. Everybody knew everybody. The building that we lived in was a small building. So on the first floor, my mother would make my sister and I sweep the hall. And, even though they had the custodial staff to do it, we would have to do it also. Because that showed that you cared about where you lived. And if there was an elderly woman that lived in the building, we always would have to, watch out for her. And, then when there was no school, she'd watch out for us. So that's the kind of environment that I grew up in. And then after that, my mom moved to Dorchester, and she and my aunt bought a 3-family garrison, lived there, went to high school, and then to college. When I grew up, Boston was very segregated. Like if you lived in Roxbury, you lived in Roxbury. Mainly Roxbury was a place where African Americans lived. Many of them were from the South, or many of them either from here or one of the islands. If you lived in South Boston, most families in South Boston were Catholic and were Irish. East Boston, the Italians. Charlestown, again, a combination of mainly Irish and Italian. And in Dorchester, there were, after Franklin Field, there were many whites and Jewish families that had come and stayed in that area for a long time. The schools also were segregated in the sense of gender. The schools, for the most part, were either all girls or all boys. Back in the day, like we had Boston Latin School, and which is co-ed, and Boston Latin Academy, which is co-ed, and O'Brien, which is co-ed. Back in the day, Boston Tech was all boys. Boston Latin Academy was Boston girls, a Latin school for girls, which was all girls, and Boston Latin School was for all boys. So the schools were gender segregated also. And, and, and very often, if you went to school, you would not have teachers that looked like me or that were Hispanic. I think I only had 2 teachers that were African American in my time of growing up in Boston during those days. What made things change, and I only had 1 Hispanic teacher, and she was a Spanish teacher. Things are different, and they're different for the better. Also, I will say Boston had a 19% Jewish population at the time, which is no longer true. In the 1960s, what happened in 61, the mayor of the city of Boston got together and decided with the banks that Boston, the demographics and it was to be made into a cosmopolitan city over time, and that the large concentration of blacks in the South End, people needed to migrate in order to create that cosmopolitan city where affluent people could come in. So the banks got together and decided how to promote that migration from the South End, Lower Roxbury, and into Dorchester, Mattapan. And so they stopped funding with the time of urban renewal. The houses were torn down. If you go out at the post office, where it is now, did not exist, that was all housing. But there were people like Melky and John O'Brien that were very focused on social justice and maintaining voice in how the city was redeveloped over time. And a lot of, so they brought together a lot of community organizations to have more voice. So if that had not happened, Boston would look even more different at this point in time. How many know about John O'Brien? Okay.
Anybody know about John D. O'Brien?
Okay. Yeah. You're in the school that's named after him. He was the first African American person to be elected to the school committee in Boston in 1977. Back in the day, the school committee was not an appointed school committee as it is now by the mayor. It was an elected school committee by the different neighborhoods, and certain neighborhoods would have a certain number of votes and a certain number of seats. So that supported, a different level of equity around education. But over time, now we have an appointed school committee that can also work effectively if people feel that they have the voice, which they do at this point. As I grew up, I spent 2 years at the Jeremiah Burke. How many of you know that school? Okay. And one of the great things about that school that has phenomenal teachers and had phenomenal teachers then, I became involved in a program for open doors wider nursing because back in the day, there weren't a lot of nurses of color. And so when I was in the 10th grade, I had this an organization that went around to the schools trying to get students from every different school, like Girls High, which is now the Dearborn, Jeremiah Burke, Girls Latin, interested in going into nursing. I was one of those people that got interested. So I went to the program. It was like this, which is a summer program. And by the time I got to be a senior, I applied to BU, Northeastern, Howard, and Boston College, and got accepted to all of those schools. I didn't go to Northeastern because they had co-op, and I didn't know what I wanted to do for co-op. As much as I thought I might want to go to Howard, it seemed really far because I was a Dorchester girl by that time. And like, oh my God, I had never been out of my neighborhood, really. And BC, most of the colleges seem to be very far also. So I selected the Boston University. I went there and graduated from the School of Nursing. So many years I've worked in cardiac care nursing. The nice thing about nursing is, what do you think is one of the great things? helping kids in need, yes. And the other thing is that you can work any one of 24 hours, any one of 365 days a year. So, and I also, one of the things I will say is wherever you go to college, wherever you're thinking you can go to college, you'll probably take one or two friends from high school, continue to keep them. They may not even go to the same college you go to. But you will also meet friends in college, and they will open your world like, never before. So be open to that. I had a best friend, and she was Bermudian. So, and my other best friend was from Barbados. Her family lived in North Cambridge, but her roots were from Barbados. We're still close friends today. So I went to BU, had a wonderful experience. During those days, that was the time of students getting involved in neighborhood issues of equality and empowerment. So I worked with some of the neighborhood groups. Mildred Haley, do any of you know Mildred Haley? How many of you know of Bromley? Bromley Housing Development? It's now called Mildred Haley. She was one of the first advocates for resident empowerment and housing. If you're on Center Street, the housing complex behind Stop and Shop, that's called the Mildred Haley Housing Development. And so I became involved with them as a nurse in terms of they started a health center out of the housing complex. It was in one of the apartments, and they started to give health services to women during pregnancy. That grew into the whole Martha Elliott Health Center. All the health centers that are in Boston started in the late 60s to 70s because of a doctor by the name of Jack Geiger, who had gone to Africa and found that the model of health delivery services there was health centers, and that we should have that model here, because prior to that, you would go to the hospital either if you were dire ill or if you were in need of an operation or something like that. When Geiger got involved with nursing students and medical students and dental students out of the different universities and met with people in the neighborhoods, one Mrs. Haley, Ms. Rayner, and also in terms of Whittier Street. That's where we got the development of all the health centers. I think Boston probably has the largest number of health centers in Massachusetts, but the point of being a health center is that they deal with a lot of preventive care. So you're not just going to the hospital when you're sick. Back in the day, places like Boston Medical used to have over 1,000 beds. Mass General had over 1,000 beds. All the hospitals had a large number of beds. They also had their own nursing schools. But when I went to college, they were starting to phase out the nursing schools and incorporate. Most people went to either university or junior college, a 2-year program for nursing. Now we have also the nurse practitioner programs, which are awesome. So I always have a shout out for nursing because we need many more nurses. So if you're thinking that that is a profession, please forge ahead. At the same time, during that time, there was a lot of, I would call racism. It wasn't always blatant in your face, but it was still racism.
Right.
Like blacks in those days, in terms of housing. When I bought my first house, my husband and I couldn't get a mortgage. I was fresh out of college, and I think I had been working 6 months. I was still in school. But so how did we get mortgages? Many times the people that own the houses would give you a mortgage. And then you, after a couple of months or something like that, then you go to the bank and the bank will say, oh, this person, they pay the bills and so forth, and we'll give them a mortgage. And also many of the blacks in the South End, the banks would not give them, and Lower Roxbury, monies to do repairs in their homes. So if you have a house and you've owned it for 25 years, it needs some repair. Or if you buy it new and it's not a brand new house, it needs repair. So that caused people to move out of the city, in addition to the banks saying, we'll give you money to buy a new house in a different area, but we're not going to give you money to repair. In the 80s, you had the advent of condos that came in, and that kind of wiped out the housing stock in terms of blacks migrating, leaving leaving the South End in large numbers, in addition to what busing did. I think when I came into this school system, we had about 103,000 students. Now we only have like 45 or 46,000 students.
Say that again. So you had 103,000 students at the beginning of your career.
In the beginning of my career.
At the Boston Public School System.
Right, and a lot. And the reason for that is because people move out the city because they cannot afford either to purchase a home or to rent space. Because, apartments go for an astronomical amount of money. What a family would pay for a 3-bedroom might be $2,000 a month. Okay, if you have just 2 working people in your family or 1 working person, that's kind of a mortgage. So if you're going to, you would prefer to have a mortgage that you own something at the end of the day. So families move out. Also, in the 80s and the 90s, particularly, we had crack cocaine that came to the cities, and because of the crime escalation from that, people move out. And so those are kind of the patterns that happen in housing. But what happens in housing also happens in the educational system in terms of the availability of students to teach. Gary at the time also came in and busing became a mandate in order to make sure that desegregation occurred. In some respects, that was very good for the city. In some respects, it signaled the decline of a certain culture in the area, because if people move out and you have the choice to go to shop at Dedham, or you have the choice to go shop in town, where we have all the stores. Now, back in the day, we used to have Jordan Marsh, Friday's, Macy's, all those stores. But early on, they would not give you credit. And not only would they not give you credit, many times they would not. It was only after busing and a lot of laws that were passed that people could get a job. I remember only seeing folks that were either operating elevators or in the major stores.
And what time period was this? This is like
So you're talking about the late 60s.
late 60s. Okay.
And also in terms of when you talk about, I speak about busing, the first black bus driver I think I met was like 60.
Wow.
So with empowerment and affirmative action, it's brought a lot of changes in terms of capacity and us becoming really a driving economic force, not only in the city of Boston, but also in the world.
Right.
I'm thinking you might.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna ask you because you see, I remember when you first came down here and you saw the pictures of all the old parts of Roxbury. So we have a team. Where's the Roxbury history, African American history of Roxbury team? We got Kylie. Okay, we got MJ. Where's Michael? Michael's not here. All right. Well, we got a few of them, and then actually she's been touching a lot on BPS 50. So where's the Boston 50 segregation team? Kyle, Jasmine. Nobody else? All right.
I see you have a brownstone there. So that looks like it's a brownstone that's somewhere in the south end. Is that correct?
Which one? On the bottom? Oh yeah, that is that is my Wally's.
Right. So
Right.
I can tell you, Wally's owns that building. Back in the day, just about all of the houses on Mass Ave were owned by African Americans. And now there are probably less than 10 buildings that are owned by people.
You mean the whole block of where Wally? Because we're going to Wally's on Friday. That whole block was owned. All those brownstones were owned by African Americans.
I will tell you, from Wally's down to Washington Street.
Wow.
Okay, on both sides. A large amount of those brownstones were owned by African Americans. They were purchased in the 30s and the 40s during the Great Migration.
All right. All right.
Also, how many of you know heard of Charles Street? Okay. So Charles Street, the reason why it's called Charles Street, because it was originally on Charles Street in Boston.
By the west
cafe.
end.
Right.
That's where we're going tomorrow.
Right. So over by the State House on Beacon Hill, that's where Charles Street was. And then early on, beginning of the last century, it moved to Charles Street where it is now. So,
I did not know that. So I guess, one of the things I'm always very interested in, letting them know, if they were born back then, where would they go and hang out as young people? Like, where were the spots?
So we had what we call settlement houses back then, okay, after school. Many parents worked after school, so they needed a place for their kids to go. And a lot of the schools hadn't developed, after-school community centers. So in the South End, they had the Harriet Tubman House. Have you ever heard of that before? Yeah. So when you go to Wally's, across from Wally's, on the other side of the street, at the corner, there's a pizza house, New York House of Pizza, but
Across the street, right.
Is a large development. It's a brand new development. I can't even tell you the name of it, but it used to be the Harriet Tubman House.
Right.
Along with Rutland Center. Down here, we had the Robert Shaw House. Every neighborhood had on Townsend Street, they had the Snowdens with their Freedom House. So every neighborhood pretty much had a settlement house or a church that had after-school activities. Now we have a strong boys and girls club in the different neighborhoods, but and some of the churches also participated.
These after-school activities were run and operated and conceived and paid for by African Americans?
African Americans, many with either city funds or state funds or private funds.
Right.
So that joined, but I remember my mother paying like 50 cents a week or something like that. It was like very affordable, particularly if you have 2 or 3 kids. But then, that's all relative. That's probably like $20 a week now or something like that. But so there was a lot of support between the churches. There were a lot of churches in Boston, a lot of churches of color that really supported families in many different ways, not only with religious and spiritual services, but also in terms of community support as well. You had the Cooper Community Center down in Roxbury, also on Linux Street. So someone must have some questions.
Right. Any more questions? Any questions? All right, go ahead. No, hold on. Microphone guy.
Well, what are the differences from today, like in the culture-wise? Like, what are the culture differences that you've noticed in your day-to-day life?
So day-to-day life. So when I grew up, as I said, most of the blacks, many of them were from the South. If you were from Cape Verde, very often with the Indian or different other populations that come, if you settled in the black neighborhood, you'd say all blacks. Okay. Now everybody has their own cultural identity. We blend together, and it's a much wealthier in terms of the spirit of the place. I had never met anyone that was from Africa until I went to college. Now the schools and the migration, I could see myself in someone that children that's from Sierra Leone, and you can look at the faces and you can say, oh, I can see my aunts, I can see my uncles, I can see, when you see people that are from Ghana, from Nigeria, and I went to school with people that were basically Caucasian. Jeremiah Burke was almost all Caucasian when I went there, and now everything is different, and also you can live any place you wanted. I went to college and decided to move out and get a room outside. My friends and I, we went to Alston, and it was hard to get an apartment. In the summertime, I think we moved out the dorm and moved on Marlborough Street and stayed in a little room, the 3 of us. But housing is much more open. Not only can you live pretty much anywhere you want, your parents and families can buy pretty much any place they can afford to buy. So that's one big difference. Foods, because of the integration, you're introduced to different foods that you would never be introduced to. It's not just, African foods, Latin foods, any kind of food, because now you go to school with different populations, you go to their families' houses, they come to your house, and that cultural piece is so enriching. I always say to students, the one thing that you need to do is that as you exchange on the cultural piece, exchange on when you study together. Because what that means is that one kid comes from one mindset, okay, and gets an A in biology. You come from a different mindset, and when you guys study, everybody gets an A. So not just only socializing together, but also getting together when you do academics and other things. And one great example of that is the Redemption Group. You know the Redemption team? That was the Salon. You watched the Olympics? Okay. And you looked at that team, you see how diverse it was? Everybody brought their strength, so they could support each other. And that occurs in the classroom as well. So.
Questions?
So nowadays we don't just live in the South End, but which there's not a large group of us in the South End. People call it that home, but we live all the way up. You can go to Brockton, Stoughton, Randolph, Milton, Brookline, Brighton. It's everywhere. It wasn't like that before. If you would go into Charlestown, I remember when I became a school nurse in Charlestown. Because once I left the hospital nursing, I went into school nursing. And I was a little concerned in the beginning. What's going to happen to my tires? What's going to happen? Because back in the day, things would happen. I knew because I was a woman that I would have a little bit more, me feel a little bit more secure. But it was fine. Charlestown was a very good place that I worked for several years and enjoyed the people. But I was concerned in the beginning. Nowadays, that doesn't exist for the most part. So, not only for women, but also for men, you could freely go in most neighborhoods. So.
Like I said, on Friday we're going to Wally's. Can you describe that entertainment district and some of the
where Wallace is,
businesses?
that really had a plethora of places. So the place that I call the Harry Tubman House, prior to that being that building, was a place called Hi Hat.
Hi Hat.
Yeah, the Hi Hat, this Tubman House, it was that until about maybe 5 years ago. They tore it down. It was sold to some developer for $17 million, if you couldn't believe it. And now it's very sophisticated housing and so forth.
Right.
They had the Blue Moon, the Hi Hat, Wally's. Wally's was the one that's only survived, and a lot of the survival happens to be because of ownership and legacy and families turning over to the next generation. Because if you don't turn something over to your next generation and support them in having it, that's where your generational wealth is. Like when my family moved to Dorchester, bought a 3-family garrison, the grandmother was on one floor, one aunt was on the other floor, my mother was on the other floor. We could go back and forth. And then when people reach a certain economic security, go out, they buy the single family, but that house still stays for other families to come in, as they come into Boston and need housing. So those are the kind of things that we look at that need to stay with us as we grow, in terms of how do we get generational wealth. And Wally's can tell you, I remember when I went there in college, and so it's still an awesome place. They were also able to tap into something not as the community moved, they still capture people in terms of university crowd and so forth. That's the other thing. Marlon will tell you that Boston, a lot of its churches in the South End. New Hope Baptist Church. Anybody know about New Hope Baptist? It started in the South End on right on Roxbury, on Shawmut Street and Lennox Street. It's now in Milton. They purchased one of the large synagogues with the also has a daycare, I believe. So as your population shifts, okay, the churches and all the other resources and supports also shift because people don't want to do the travel with the car. Before those were neighborhood churches, and for many years, people, even if they moved out the neighborhood, would still go back. Concord Baptist Church, you know what Concord is? Okay, so that's another.
Are these churches still standing? 'Cause I know we have the picture of the Dudley Street Baptist Church that used to be by.
So Concord is still
Union
there,
Square.
but it's now housing. It's been housing for probably maybe 15 years now. So most of the churches that were in the south, Ebenezer is no longer there. Many of them are gone, and they have been torn down. Their condominiums, which are very wealthy condominiums. But there a lot of Boston had a 19% Jewish population. There were a lot of synagogues. Many of them are gone. The West End no longer exists as a housing community. So, and some of that is okay because when people migrate from and gain a certain economic stability and move out of the given neighborhood to another area, that's okay. But it should be something that's done with people engaged and involved in the process. So.
Sonia, you had a
I
question?
have a question. If you could change one thing that you noticed from the past, what would it be?
I think probably if I could change one thing, would be greater empowerment to the neighborhoods in terms of having voice as to what occurs with some of the housing stock. Because I think when you move people in large numbers, when it's done in an economic fashion, without them knowing what the true vision is, everybody loses. So.
I have another question over here. Can you speak to you mentioned two things that I was interested in, which was the church bought the synagogue in Milton. I actually was the house, I grew up in the house past the parking lot, so like the church parking lot,
Okay.
my house. So I was curious, because you said a lot of the Boston, 20% of Boston is Jewish, and that population, where did they disperse?
So what happens is when so I think we're learning to be in neighborhoods that when one group moves in, the other group doesn't have to say, oh, let's get out because the blacks are moving in, the Hispanics are moving in, or the Asians are moving in, and neighborhoods are more integrated now. But many of the Jews, remember it's after World War II when this migration started, and many of them moved to Brookline, West Roxbury, Milton. So they just moved up. And you're talking about a population that's getting older, like in the South, and a lot of the blacks that were living there have been living here 20 to 30 years. If you move in some place when you're about 30 to 40, buy a house then. By the time you're 60, you're like, well, do I want to start all over? I'll go live with my granddaughter or niece or sell the house. It's too much to handle or something like that. And so that's what happens. Even in parts of Dorchester, a lot of the Irish moved to Braintree, different parts. So.
And then can you speak to the impact on the community when the church in Roxbury was broken down and made it to the police station? Because one of our groups has been talking about the impact of.
So I think she's talking about the police station on
Roxbury.
like the businesses and stuff over there by the police station by the Northeastern.
I think anytime you have something done without community involvement,
That's what I want to know. How much of the community, were there other places that they
there's
did that?
there's a loss. And what happens is that when people start moving and not attending a church in large numbers, there's revenue that's lost because the church has to keep going. There's a group that has to be supported, even though the tax base is not there, they still have things that have to be kept up to snuff. And also you've got to look at it not only in a microscopic view of what's happening with that church and that church community, but also what's happening with religion in itself, you know, in terms of many people attending church. I don't know, I could probably go around and how many of you go to church every single Sunday?
How many available church members?
Every single Sunday.
Right. So I grew up in a time when you had to go to church every Sunday, early in the morning. And it was Sunday school, and then after that was regular church, and then after that it was, you know, if you belonged to the young people's, and so, right, and I said, oh, this is just too much church. So what I did was I got a job at the Brigham and Women's Hospital on Saturday and Sunday as a secretary, you know, war secretary. And that was before religion was at the point of not being at the center of American life. And, you know, and I think, you know, you have to again look at things in a larger picture of what has evolved in terms of the church as being the center of everybody's life. So when you have the decline of enrollment or attendance at church, that has an effect in your neighborhood. You know, and if someone is moving to Mattapan and the city wants to do something with the church or you know, Lower Roxbury, if they don't have the parishioners, it's hard for them to, you know, the parishioners are 80 or 90 years old. Those parishioners can only hold so much of that church together.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So like, do you have any like stories like of like, because I'm just imagining, like you said, like, you know, where the post office is, used to have housing and people owned the houses. Like any stories of like what people actually went through? Because like one of the things I'm trying to, you know, get the youth to understand through this process that we're going through is that like, I want to hear more of like, because the stories they will respond to are more personal. Like there was a woman that lived literally on this corner. The person came over, you know, because they get this broad, you know, African-American history that kind of puts it as displacement, but it's like, yeah, that's a very neat word, but it was more pain and real people that went through things. So any
Right,
stories
it
of that?
happens in a number of ways. It happens displacement by Miss So-and-so can't pay her taxes. Or Miss So-and-so's, her kids are living somewhere else and she's handling that building by herself. Or Mr. So-and-so, urban renewal has come and said, we're taking your house.
That's the one, like the ones by force.
Right,
Yeah.
so eminent domain is when they went to this whole area and said, we're going to build a state thruway. Okay, and unless you have enough political fight, this is what we're going to do. So meantime, they're taking people's houses while Mel King and other folks in the neighborhood are fighting, but still the house comes down. So we might be able to say, you know, a lot of it, but before you get through the courts and so forth, you may lose some of the neighborhood, and that's kind of what happens.
And then it's costly to go through that process. So,
Right. So, and they only give you eminent domain a certain amount of money. They don't give you all the houses worth 500,000. We're going to give you that. No, you don't get that. And many times, you know, because it's such a agonizing kind of situation, people get tired of going to the meetings, of fighting, and they get worn down. So that happens to many of our neighborhoods. It happened in Newton to, you know, in the area where the River Baptist Church was, because of the turnpike. You know, a lot of areas. So
I heard about that.
state throughways and you know, a lot of property in neighborhoods of color are taken. Also, a lot of neighborhoods of color have more factories in terms of, so what does that mean medically? That means more asthma, more you know, allergens in the air, and those kinds of things. Because at one point, Lower Roxbury had many factories. People know where Terrace Street is?
Terrace Street?
Yeah, it's on the back of Bromley. There's New England Baptist has a huge parking lot, which used to be an egg factory across from it. The Mason building, that used to be a huge pickle factory. So Boston had, and then there are a couple of breweries in that area. Boston had a large number of factories at one time that, you know, are again, because of people's, how they support themselves and, going from one economy in terms of an industrial economy to more of less of a manufacturing economy, those things are lost in time. Some of them, that's just the problem, what's gonna happen. Like we have a large number of shoe factories in the area, and those things are gonna be lost, but what do we replace it with? And what does the community have in terms of voice in that piece? When you go to see Wally's on Tremont Street, there's a huge building, and it's called the Piano Factory. People know what the Piano Factory is? Okay. So that is a building that has a lot of artists, like Paul Goodnight, Dana Chandler. A lot of them, it used to be artist residence. Some of it still exists, but some of it I think now is part rental space and part condo space. But that was renovated in the early 70s. And it was, back in the day, it was one of the second or third largest buildings to the Capitol. So,
another question about the cultural hub part, because Tatelum is an African American cultural hub. Like, pretend like we're at Roxbury Crossing, we're walking down. Like, what are the businesses that you would see walking down from the street from this Roxbury Crossing to, I don't know, like towards Ruggles and Raleigh's and all that?
well, Connolly's.
Connolly's?
Connolly's used to be like Wally's back in the day.
Okay, another jazz club.
Right, and that was around until about 15, 20 years ago.
Really?
Yes. Then you see a lot of businesses, kind of like you see now in terms of food
Dentists,
places.
food places.
Yeah, back in the South, then there were a lot of dentists. There were still one or two dentist places. Wealthy black businesses. that
Right.
have a strong economic economy in terms of black money staying within the community.
Right.
So, again, integration has its merits, but at the same time, once you integrate and you don't bring the money back to your community gets, lost.
Right. Right. No, I told them a lot about the black flight. Like we talk about white flight, but there was black flight. People that could afford to get out of the community
Right.
when the property values and things started going down, they left. And then, like you said, these are the investors. These are the community leaders. These are people who are funding the churches. So once they leave, like, there's a lot missing. Any questions?
Because when you have
Okay.
middle class black person, a middle class Hispanic person, a middle class Asian person, along with people that are working class, everybody gets lifted up. Okay. But if you just have one class, there's no fertilization between the classes.
Right. Right. Any questions?
I have a question. What do you think the importance is of having local businesses and storefronts?
I think it's really important because that's the strength. Not only is that the strength of your community, that's the strength of America. It's money returning itself. It's you seeing someone that you know on a regular basis that cares about you versus going to a store that's, people don't know you. They may even walk around. I don't know what yours.
Yeah.
Let me follow that person. Let me see what they're getting. It becomes a relational thing, and the more you have a relation with something, the richer you are in many ways, but also economically.
I also have a question. What is your favorite childhood memory here?
So again, as I said, I grew up. My favorite years are the years that I lived in Lenox. Okay, and my mother down by where the Cathedral Church is, there used to be a lot of factories. Okay, and my mother, when she first came to Boston, she started working as a stitcher. Okay, it's a company called London Fog, and she would sew pieces, like the collar, then the sleeve, and she would get paid by that. And after work, she would walk from the where the 888 is down on Sherman Avenue way, almost in town. You know where Tufts Medical Center is?
Yes.
Okay. So my mother would walk from that area, okay, because there were a lot of factories, to the Cathedral project. And she would save her money, which was like 15 cents to take the bus. But she would save it because it was a place to buy cookies, and she would buy cookies and bring them home. So. And the other piece I enjoyed in terms of living in the Linux is that when the school was out and we didn't have microwaves in those days. It wasn't that long ago, but we just didn't have microwaves. So she would open the soup and say, okay, I'm putting it on the radiator. And, you know, and you would get burned, but then you have hot soup.
Wow. What about Nubian Square now? Like, I know there was like Nubian Oceans.
Yeah, Nubian Oceans, oh God, he was the hub of that square. There's so many, stores and, you could go in and if you wanted to buy something culturally and just feel good about yourself, you would go to Nubian Ocean. And the whole surrounding area, they used to have a supermarket called Blair's back in the day. They had a fish market. I think Nubian Square.
And all black owned.
Not all was black owned, but it was just a place that you could go on Saturdays. And it was just,
All there.
that like Center Street is in terms of.
Like Center Street. Right.
Yeah, so, or if you go to Mattapan, Square. So, to have that coming back again, I think it's really important. You feel like, you're in your own world, so.
But that was when the Orange Line used to run through there.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Because that was, I tell them that's what's fed those businesses, is having that
That's
line, right?
But I think Bowling Building having positive stuff
Yes.
right in that community has also, fueled the economy there, so.
Any other questions?
So I just think it's important to know your history, know, who was there before you, give homage to those groups, because, unless you've been there for generations, you too will at some point in time say, after 2 or 3 generations, you're moving. If you're not moving, the city will say, okay, this is what's happening to the housing. But become active, become a voice, and there are a lot of, there are a lot of different organizations within your school and within your community that you can become a part of.
All
Your
right.
voice is important.
Well, thank you, Ms. Nolan. Really appreciate you. Everybody, give it up for Ms. Nolan. Taking the time to come and spend time with us.
I just have one thing to show you.
Okay, she has something to show you guys.
So this is John O'Brien, when he was running for school.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. And that's the original, yes, I can see.
Oh, hey.
So know your history.
Right. Alright. Well, guys, if you have any questions, ask me something. I don't know, go right ahead now, but we're